quarter of the people who believe the conspiracy didn't believe it after like 8 minutes of talking to the AI. Well, it's just like way more people changing their minds than anyone would have ever expected based on the literature. So, and not just that, but like we also measured both 2 weeks and 2 months later. And not only do they still not believe, they don't believe the conspiracy to the same extent as they did 2 months before. Like it really changed their mind and it stuck. And it even decreased how much people believed other conspiracies after the conversation. So
since you mentioned AI, let's pivot to that area. Tell me more about this research that you have done about like effects of using LLMs on misinformation, whether you can avoid misinformation and so on.
So yeah, so the research isn't just to clarify the kind of like it's not if you're using LLMs, what happens to you. This is more like can we use an LLM as experimenters to truly like change someone's mind who you would not expect their mind to be changed. So the way that we do these experiments is we have in one set of studies, for example, it was published in Science in 2024. We had people who believe conspiracies enter the study. They wrote about a conspiracy in their own words. And we didn't say conspiracy. We like defined it, evil plot, nefarious, blah, blah, blah. And then we said, some people call these conspiracy theories. We put that in air quotes. And then people wrote about something. It might be like, they think 9/11 is an inside job or that the moon landing was a hoax or whatever. And then they provide some reasons why they believe that, and it might be something like, if they think the 9/11 is an inside job, they'd say, well, World Trade Center 7 collapsed. It wasn't hit by a plane. And then the one person said like, George W. Bush, when he found out about it, he didn't seem to react that much. And that seemed kind of fishy to me. Anyway, so they say that. And then, well, we give that to a large language model. In this case, it was GPT-4 Turbo. We told the AI to debunk the conspiracy using facts and evidence and to like create a thoughtful conversation where the person is being challenged and that you're using facts and evidence to challenge it, basically. So it's a debunking. That is different than the AI that you talk to. If you just go to ChatGPT, unless you prompt it to give you a counter argument, it's not going to do that. It'll just agree with you on anything, basically. So we're forcing it to tell them they're wrong. And then they have a conversation about the conspiracy. So anyways, it just provides specific counter arguments to everything the person says. And like, unlike it for a standard like conversation that someone might have with a conspiracy theorist where they're down the rabbit hole, it's almost impossible to come up with reasons for all, because a lot of them are very idiosyncratic. The examples I gave aren't that idiosyncratic, but there are lots of like very random reasons that you would never know how to like respond to. The AI is spectacular at it. Like everything the person says is batted down with some sort of like evidence. And then what happens is, and we ask people like both before and after the conversation how much they believe the statement. People's confidence in their belief decreases by like just really large, crazy effect. And so so we're doing a lot more of experiments that are trying to kind of test limits of this sort of thing. And yeah.
Do we see any difference among personality types? So let me just make up something. So let's say I am high in openness to experience. Am I more likely to change my mind after I'm confronted with the facts and logic?
Well, not openness to experience. I mean, I don't know if we tested that particular, but it doesn't really predict. That's more about, are you willing to go skiing and stuff? You know what I mean? It doesn't quite measure the thing that we care about. We have measured actively open-minded thinking, which I mentioned before, which is like the extent to which you basically value evidence expressly. And that does moderate the effect. People who are more open-minded change their mind more. It's like kind of obvious. But what's interesting is that even the people who are expressly like, my beliefs are too important, like I am right, and it like your evidence isn't, like they expressly kind of reject this idea of being open-minded, they still change their mind. You know what I mean? So it is the case that evidence is important for everybody. Even people who are kind of like expressly like identifying as someone who doesn't like care about that kind of thing, and they just have their faith in whatever. Once you lay the facts out, it's kind of hard to deny it.
So is it the case that if I am misled by anyone else or any other ideology or any other idea, that I am more likely to fall into this because of cognitive laziness versus any, let's say, evil intention or like intentionally following this. Was this related to the research that you made? And maybe you can make connections there.
It definitely is. Like there's this, there's kind of two competing, really different views on the nature of human errors in the field. One is the sort of thing that I've been describing, which is that errors emerge largely, maybe not like, certainly not entirely, but like to a great extent, because people are not thinking enough about what they see online or what they, just their intuitions, or they're not really questioning their intuitions, and they're kind of going with their gut too much. And that generally is good, but it's just like there are lots of contexts where your intuitions are going to be faulty, and you have to like recognize that. So kind of laziness, mental laziness is like kind of big culprit for those types of errors. But there's this whole other like body of work, especially in social psychology, that is focused on like motivated reasoning, where especially in like political context or like just generally motivational contexts, where people, if anything, they're reasoning too much. You know what I mean? They're convincing themselves that the things that they want to be true are true, and they use, and there's the most extreme version of these theories expressly argue that people use deliberation in order to facilitate bias. And so like that means when they say motivated reasoning, they really mean it's the reason they're engaging in reasoning and it's motivated. We've done a lot of research on this, and it's very hard to find good evidence for that form of motivated reasoning. Like if you, for example, we have these studies on like fake news. And so in those studies, not that dissimilar to the bullshit stuff, they see like fake news headlines and they see like true news headlines. And what we want to know is, do they believe the false ones, or do they believe the true ones? And can they distinguish between what's true and false? Okay. But we also have mixed in there a manipulation of whether the content is consistent with their political ideology or inconsistent. Okay. And so one of the key findings from the literature is that people who are more deliberative and more reflective, people who are they're less likely to rely on their intuitions, and they're more likely to kind of stop and think. They're less likely to believe fake news. They're a bit more likely to believe true news, and they're much better at distinguishing between what's true and false. People who are better at reasoning are better at distinguishing between what's true and false, and regardless of whether it's consistent or inconsistent with their ideology, and essentially to the same extent. It doesn't matter if it's consistent with their ideology or inconsistent. If you're more reflective, you're distinguishing between what's true and false more. So there were some like past studies where like deliberation was shown to exacerbate bias. Very hard to find those sorts of results. Almost always deliberation just kind of undermines error.
As AI generated content becomes more and more available and maybe surpasses human generated content, human generated news, articles, books, anything. So are we going to see more or less conspiracy theories in the future?
Oh, I don't know. I've got no idea. I don't know. And I don't know that there's a connection between just the way that AI is being used in people's belief in conspiracies. Like because I think overall they are, like if you just were to go on GPT and ask about conspiracy, it probably would provide good, it's not going to disagree with you. It's maybe not as good as it would be in our experiment where we're expressly trying to make sure that it's responding for facts and evidence. It'll be more kind of open and accepting than it should be. But it will provide counter arguments to you, unless you're kind of like finagled it to like never do that, which is also a possibility. But there are also ways. We've done an experiment where we used AI to convince people to believe conspiracies. There's a debriefing at the end of that one where we now unconvince them at the end, so they end up being more skeptical than they did at the start. But we build up a case. They're like, oh, okay, and then we're like, never mind, and then they're like, oh, okay. So it can go both ways, and so in the future, who's to say, man? I don't know.
After this ends, I'm going to go to ChatGPT and going to convince ChatGPT that Earth is flat, and let's see what happens. Maybe I'm going to be successful in changing it.
Well, there are people in our studies who thought they won the argument, and they definitely not.
Thank you for listening or watching. If you want to stay updated on future episodes, please follow the show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Please also consider leaving a like on YouTube or a review on Spotify, as this helps the show reach a lot of people. You can also leave comments if you have any personal thoughts on the topics discussed during the episode. More conversations and solo episodes are on the way in the following weeks, and following the show is the best way to be notified about them. If you would like to reach out to me directly, you can DM me on Instagram at philosophy.everyday. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.